Welcome to my world history notes, where I read from the book that I wrote to teach homeschoolers world history. A Bible believer looks at world history. And we're going to discuss Japan and Germany a little bit in more depth, building up to World War II and the rise of fascism. So hopefully I won't have the audio problems today that I did yesterday. Um, in any event, we'll begin. And you can purchase my book on lulu.com, amazon.com, or the Bible Baptist bookstore, or just follow me here. And I hope that whatever I say, whether you agree with it or don't agree with it, or think it's stupid, or just have other information, that it'll spur you on to study world history. So in any event, Japan founded a puppet state in Manchuria named Manchukuo, starting in 1932. With Japanese investment and a rich base of natural resources, Manchukuo became an industrial powerhouse, a capitalist bastion in a region beset by burgeoning communism. The Vatican acknowledged the new state in 1934. Only 23 of the then existing roughly 80 other countries on Earth did during its existence. It has come to light that part of a huge Japanese investment in Manchukuo was raised by the drug traffic. Increasingly, FDR fought diplomatically and economically to stop Japan's excesses. In Europe, Hitler's initial success can be attributed to economic hardships brought on by the Great Depression and resentment created by the Versailles Treaty and the manipulations of France and Great Britain. Great Britain had a policy of always supporting the second most powerful nation in the continent of Europe against the most powerful, as a way of balancing its enemies off against one another. Since France was the most powerful now, Britain secretly supported Germany in a number of ways, particularly in helping to rebuild the German Navy. However, the fact that Britain would not agree that Germany's colonies should be returned, colonies lost under the Versailles Agreement, was a serious point of contention between the two. Both Hitler and Japan repeatedly made overtures of friendship toward America during the 1930s. Both claimed to be fighting the good fight against Soviet Russia-inspired communism. During the decade preceding World War II, American exports to Japan were greater than our exports to China and Russia combined. But eventually, we would attempt to choke the ability of Japan to conduct its agenda by cutting off the oil we supplied them. But before that happened, let's look at Hitler, one of history's greatest evils. He created in Germany an absolute dictatorship that revolved around the cult of the Fuhrer, the leader. Once in power, Hitler was ruthless to all who went against him, even his friends. In 1934, he personally conducted a bloody purge of his stormtroopers. More than 150 of the senior members of the brown-shirted SA were shot, many of them still shouting Heil Hitler at their execution. The purge was called the Night of the Long Knives. After the murders and executions of even innocent people who were just in the way had died down, Hitler announced, quote, "In this hour, I was responsible for the fate of the German people, and therefore I became the supreme justice of the German people. Everyone must know that in future time, if he raises his hand to strike at the state, then certain death will be his lot." Racial laws were codified in Nazi Germany, and Jews became a prime target. It started out with beatings and boycotts of Jewish shops, then vandalism and the destruction of property. The 1935 Nuremberg laws stripped Jews of citizenship, and they were forbidden to marry. With a brief interlude around the 1936 Berlin Olympics for PR purposes, the propaganda and maltreatment of Jews continued unabated. One good source book is Nazi Germany and the Jews by Saul Friedlander. False stories were spread about the Jews, and they were depicted in movies as being subhuman. Then in 1938, the persecution exploded in Kristallnacht, or the Night of the Broken Glass. Jewish homes were raided and businesses destroyed by the stormtroopers. The SS and the police would do nothing. The average German went along with the brutality, and it swept up in the hysteria and violence. More than 1,000 synagogues were destroyed, and over 400 Jews murdered that night. America withdrew their ambassador, and a boycott of German goods began, but nothing was done that could have helped the Jewish people. Now Jews were forbidden to own businesses or shops, to participate in trade or commerce. The goal was a Jewish-free economy. Jews were banned from schools, universities, movie theaters, and sports facilities. Certain areas were called Aryan only, and no Jew was permitted to enter. Hitler was bent on a policy of extermination. He still blamed the Jews for communism and the defeat of Germany in World War I. The Nazis tried to force emigration, but that was unsuccessful. The infamous Adolf Eichmann even visited Palestine and met with Arab leaders to try to increase Jewish settlement there. Excuse me. Then Germany copied something that Britain had done in the Boer War in creating what were called concentration camps. In 1933, 3 concentration camps at Dachau, Buchenwald, and Sachsenhausen were created. Jews, communists, Catholics, and Protestants who didn't cooperate, socialists, and anyone voicing disagreement with the government were sent to these camps. Soon others were needed and were placed at Ravensbrück, Belsen, Grossrosen, and Papenburg. When Poland was invaded, concentration camps were built to effect the extermination of the Jews, called the final solution to the Jewish question. Conditions inside the camps were horrible to the extreme, with starvation and extreme cruelty enacted on helpless inmates of both sexes and all ages. Eugenics, the study of controlled selective breeding to manipulate the human race genetically, had become the rage for the intellectual elite of the West in the early years of the 20th century. Excuse me. Sorry about that this morning. Hitler carried it to such an extreme, along with forced sterilization and experimental surgeries, experimentation on living persons, and bizarre surgical tortures, that eugenics movement leaders were forced to disguise their efforts after the war in controlling and manipulating the world's populations. The modern environmental movement, even including the current craze about global warming, can be directly traced back to these people. SS guards, chosen from the worst elements in the Nazi Party, tortured and worked inmates beyond the capacities of physical endurance. People were literally worked to death. 4 types of people were classified: opponents of the Nazis, inferior racial groups like Jews and Gypsies, criminals, and shiftless elements, they called, such as homosexuals. Pseudo-scientific experiments were conducted on mentally ill people and retarded children. Once World War II got underway, certain groups marked for extermination, such as Jews, Gypsies, and the mentally ill, were gassed and euthanized in death camps and asylums. Even if ordinary Germans had wanted to resist the effort, that might have been useless. Ever since the Reichstag fire in 1933, which the Nazis had used as an excuse to consolidate power, civil liberties have been extinguished. No one could safely speak out against the wickedness of the government. At times, entire areas of towns were cordoned off, and SA brown shirts, SS stormtroopers, and Gestapo would go from house to house looking for anything anti-Nazi. With the surveillance apparatus that the Nazis had in place, organized resistance was virtually impossible. Adolf Hitler and the Nazis had created a nation where their idea of the Aryan race was lifted up as a model of perfection, and all others were inferior. To Hitler, the German people were a people of destiny who were to lead the world on a 1,000-year right. It was to be a golden age where, quote, inferior people were to be subdued, to be forced to fall at the feet of the superior German. To Hitler, the ideal man was a stereotypical blonde-haired, blue-eyed German, although many Germans, including Hitler, did not meet this standard. The myth of the Aryan Superman dominated the Nazi ideology. If you recall, the ancient Persians referred to themselves as Aryans. The Nazis were also heavily into the occult. We're going to talk about Japan next, and I hope that this will encourage you to study this period of time and world history in general, and I thank you for listening.